All right, we're here. It's a Monday, and we're finally back
Hey,
after, I guess we call it a summer hiatus. I think is the right language in the broadcasting space. I don't know. I just we do it live. We see what kind of trouble we get into. But I can actually say good morning to you because you're behind me. You're living in the past. You're out there on the West Coast. Good morning,
a
Jonathan. How
little
you doing?
bit, yes.
Just
Hi,
slightly.
I'm doing good. Yeah, it's 11 a.m. Here, and I like that the welcome screen it says like most Mondays. So
Yeah.
yeah, I believe that matches to the summer hiatus.
It's the only way to go. You just got to be like periodically, when the muse strikes us. I have more or less been on the road since the middle of April, so it's been really hard to do these on the road, and I don't have a particularly great mobile setup. But now I'm home now for I guess 6 weeks or so, so I'm going to try to take advantage of that and get some episodes in. But thanks for agreeing to hang out with me, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining
Thank you
us.
for having me.
Of course, my pleasure. My pleasure. Well, why don't you start by giving us a little bit of your background, your origin story. How did you get into this crazy space? And you can take that as far back as you want. I definitely have a few questions I want to get into as we delve into that. But give us your origin story.
So hi, I'm Jonathan, and I work in the Spring engineering team. I mostly work on micrometer and Spring Sleuth and other features which are mostly observability related because I am one of the let's say observability engineers of the Spring team, whatever would that mean. And I get into computer science uh, in an interesting way. Or a little bit. I believe the whole thing has started when I was a kid. I really liked reading, and I read a lot. And I believe the the motivation there was also like this hunger for information
Mm-hmm.
and learning new things. And like in front of a computer screen, you have infinite amount of that.
Right.
Uh, so I believe my first computer that was a Commodore 64. And
Yes.
I had like a Commodore 16 as well.
Oh
And
wow.
that was I am not that old because
Right.
they wanted to like throw those out, and my our neighbor basically saved them and like give it to me, but they only lasted for like I don't know like a year or two.
Sure.
Maybe they broke up pretty quickly. Uh, and my next computer after that, it was like 3 years later. It was like a
Okay.
Pentium 4, I guess.
Oh yeah, that's a big
In
upgrade from the
yeah,
Commodore 64.
and yeah, because I am from a very small village, and I guess there was always like a better thing to invest in than
Sure.
buying a computer at that time and in that place.
Sure. Sure.
So I believe I was like 15 years old when I got my first real computer, and I loved it. Uh, Mostly because of having this endless source of information.
Sure.
So yeah, that's how we got friends, and after that, it was interesting because in Hungary, I am from Hungary, by the way. In Hungary, you need to choose two kind of like majors uh,
Okay.
in uh, in high school, and
Okay.
these two classes that you need to take in more seriously, and you will have
Sure.
more advanced topics, more advanced teachers, and so on. And at the end of high school, we have like a huge, like a week-long exam where you need to do exams, like verbal and written exams for a couple of topics, including your majors usually.
Sure.
And I wanted to choose my majors as computer science and I guess biology because
Okay.
I really like that, and I also really liked biology teacher. And it was like in the first day of school, in September after I needed to choose like these 2 topics or 2 majors at the end of the previous year, and then the next day I start with that. And
Sure.
when you start a year in September in Hungary, you get your schedule basically. You are not putting your schedule together, you will get one. And my schedule said that on Tuesday, on the, I don't know, 7th and 8th classes on that day, for biology majors, it would be like a double biology. For CS majors, it will be CS. And I was like, okay, how should I be like 2 places at the same time?
Right.
And it's like, oh, you should not. You need to pick something else.
Choose.
And you can choose from history, literature, grammar, like arts, like drawing and singing as well. And I was like, okay, not any of these are like for me. And there was also chemistry, which was like teach by the same teacher, and I loved that as well. So that's how I went for like biology and chemistry major in high school. And at that point, I believe I supposed to be like a medical doctor or like a dentist or and so on. But like eventually, I went to a university for a CS program with. So in these programs, you will need to like in Hungary, you need to get points, and you get points by all of the like your performance during the 4 years in high school based on the grades you get, and also the like 1 week long exams. And because of this, like the university was kind enough to let everyone basically get into a CS class with, I guess, basically any STEM major. So that's how my biology and chemistry major was good for a CS program. So that's how I got into like a CS program in the university, in a university in Hungary. And that's just good.
I was gonna say that's funny because I actually started as a chemistry major when I went to university, and because at the time my college, the computer science program was basically a math major with a little bit of computer science, and that just didn't appeal to me. And so I saw, well, hey, this chemistry thing, I enjoyed that in high school. Let's play around with that. And I noticed that what I really liked was the fact that I got to do a bunch of cool stuff on these SGI workstations, and we did a lot of stuff in the computer lab. And eventually I realized, hey, wait, that's actually a lot more fun than doing all the chemistry things. And so OChem was where I realized I want to be a computer science major. And it was at that point that my school also then created a real computer science degree that had just a smattering of math. And that's like, yeah, I can probably get through 3 math classes. Although my advisor spent countless hours telling me how much I would enjoy higher level math, because of course he was a math major in college. And he said, you would really love string theory and you would love this. It's all very philosophical. I'm like, well, that's cool, but I got to get through these other courses first, and there's no way I could survive that. He's like, well, yeah, that would be a problem. Like, so thus I learned how to play with computers instead.
Yeah, in Hungary that was similar. Even in the time when I went to the university, so it was basically. So there are 3 flavors of computer science in Hungary, basically, like 3 like branches that you want to apply for, and one of them is basically like a lot of math and computer science. And there is another one called like engineering computer science or something that was mine as well. A lot of physics, like robotics, electrical engineering, and computer science as well.
Sure.
And there is like a third one, which is like economy and computer science.
Nice.
So yeah, I had a lot of like math, physics classes. Maybe like a third of my classes was physics related. A third of my classes were like math related, and the rest was actually like computer science.
Wow. Oh, that's a hard go. Hey, we got a fuel Snable citing hello and all that. So hey, good afternoon, Fuel Stable. Good to have you with us. I always love it when people actually comment. I got to meet one of my commentators, Code with Sean, when I was at KCDC, and so he and I had a wonderful conversation. So I'm going to have to get him
Nice.
on the big show here at some point over the course of the next few weeks. But yeah, it is interesting how we've seen that shift. That computer science sort of grew out of the math department in most schools. I think every one of my professors was a math undergrad, and they all had.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think they all had computer science. I don't think there was any math PhDs in my program, but that's where, for better or worse, that came from. And I don't know that I've really ever used any of my math in my data. I've used some philosophy. I took a logic class that's had a lot more to do with my programming than anything I did in math, but I'm sure that's going to rile up some math people, but I'm okay with that. I'm willing to take that risk.
Yeah, I actually use those sometimes. Like, I remember I was writing tests, like using like a huge amount of set theory
Oh,
to
sure.
cover like a lot of like cases, and kind of like trying to formally prove that everything is covered. Also, that was basically the observability days. I derivated a couple of functions so that I can prove that hey, the data is basically like growing because the derivative is
Sure.
like it was around just above zero. So it was like just a little bit growing, and I use a methodology from my like electrical engineering classes, because there, or not just electrical engineer, I believe like math and like, I'm not sure if it is like a common thing in CS, but when they teach you like Boolean algebra, and also like electrical engineering stuff, you need to be able to basically simplify logic circuits,
Sure.
which is basically, if you have a huge if statement, how to make it small.
Right.
I use those a lot. So there are like two methods for that. If you Google it, there are like you can do it like there are softwares for that. One is called the Cardinal map. The other
Okay.
one is called Quine-McCluskey, I guess. And
Sure.
you just put your your function there, or not there, like a Boolean function or a Boolean expression, and it will simplify it so that it will be like more readable. It will be easier to handle. Sometimes I use that. Sometimes I use it
Sure.
even like on pen and paper because it's not that complicated. Yeah, so that's a really good like skill I used quite a lot, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know how this came up, but my son was asking me the other day about binary, and he said, like, can you read binary? And I'm like, well, I mean, sort of. You don't work at that level. And I said, but obviously everything you write in the computer eventually becomes zeros and ones, on, off, whatever you want to call it. But nobody writes at that level. And I thought back, well, in college, I guess we had to do some assembler, and that wasn't a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
fun. Especially because at that point you've already had usually 2 or 3 or 4 programming classes, and you've written a bunch of stuff in C or Java or something, and you've written in a high level language. And I'm like, okay, now we're going to do that with logic gates. And you're like, why would I do this? And they're like, and now you're going to do that same thing with only XOR gates. And you're like, oh, come on. And just really?
Yeah.
Yeah, good times.
I had classes where this was basically assignments. Like I had assembly class, but I had like classes when I needed to basically control things and do basically the same assignment, first with using relays. So just these
Sure.
like quickie things, and putting together like logic gates from relays.
Right.
And
Right.
also then do like similar or the same thing using ICs, like true like logic gates with transistors in them, and with pneumatics as well, because
Mm-hmm.
apparently there
Mm-hmm.
are logic gates for pneumatical applications. That was crazy, but I
Yeah.
loved it. I was really
I
happy I get into like that
Oh
like
yeah. Yeah. Well, and there is some logic, I guess, in understanding what it all compiles down to and appreciating that. And I certainly, when I made the transition out of chemistry, liked the fact that if I made a mistake on line 64, I just went and corrected line 64. When you make a mistake in step 17 of a chemical reaction, there's no going back. There's no undo button. There's no, thank goodness I stored that in version control. It's, you need to now dispose of this properly and then start over.
If you are lucky. If you are unlucky, you need to leave the building.
That happened in our lab once. I don't remember all the specifics. It was one of the professors was doing something after hours, and luckily for them, one of the other profs was around, and I think they smelled almonds or something. Whatever they smelled, they're like, "Oh, this isn't good," and they ran in the lab, and sure enough, that person was very close to doing a reaction that would have probably killed them and maybe other people if the ventilation system wasn't working properly. And so you start to go, "Yeah, I don't have to worry about that with my simple computer program. You know, worst I can do is like wipe out my hard drive, I guess." So you grew up in Hungary. How did you end up in the Pacific Northwest? This is something that I have been wondering since we were hanging out together. I guess was that last month or the month before? I don't remember. Whenever we were in Seattle for Spring One tour, and I just, I love the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, it was okay. So how did you end up in the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, so after the university, or like actually the last year or the last semester in the university, I started working at a company whose main profile was software outsourcing.
Okay.
So they basically like sold us to other companies, and
Sure.
like one of those companies was like a huge like a US company, and I worked there for I guess like almost 6 years. And it was in 2015 when they basically like asked me to come here for a couple of business trips. I basically spent like the third of the year here in the US in 2015 on being on business trips. I hated flying that time.
A long time.
Because it's a yes, and also because like I was on like a visa which was for business trips, and I was told by the travel department of my company that don't enter the country in Seattle because they are like way more rigorous. It's harder. I believe because like TSA here like has like more issues to deal with, so they need to like look into things like deeper. So I was flying from Budapest to Frankfurt, and from Frankfurt to Chicago, and from Chicago to Seattle. So when people say that, hey, like I go like to Europe, and from Europe I'm flying to the US, and my flight is like 10 hours, I was like, yeah, like my trips were like almost 24 hours at that time because of these hops and layovers. They add up like pretty quick.
They do.
So in that year, I believe it happened on my very first business trip in 2015. They asked me to basically transfer, and flying direct is a great trip. And I guess Dan had some issues with KCDC.
Dan learned that the hard way last week. We there were some good lessons learned for Dan, which is yes, fly direct, and of course, rule 2: do not fly through Chicago. It's not cold ordeal.
I can second it.
Yeah. Chicago is a tough city to fly through. Ironically enough, especially in the summer months, because the thunderstorms have a huge impact, bigger impact than snow in most cases. So avoid Chicago. So I'm sorry that you had to transit into the U.S. through the Chicago airport. Chicago's a lovely city. I love Chicago. And flying there is fine, but flying through there is problematic.
So there were at that time actually there were no like direct flights from Hungary to the US, like none of the cities. So that was like at least like one hop. But because they also asked me, I don't know like why really, because I believe I can bear with like more rigorous TSA checks, like or entering the country, than having like another stop at
Right.
Chicago. But
Right.
yeah, I was told to do this, and I believe it happened because like this company was founded in Belarus, and this is a US
Okay.
company, but a lot of people are from Eastern Europe. There are like a lot of
Sure.
like Ukrainians, like Belarus, and people from Russia as well.
Oh,
And
okay.
I like Hungary is part of the EU. I have visa waiver. I can like
Right.
basically like travel to the US like without visa. Uh, so I believe it's less complicated for me, and I don't
Right.
know how complicated it is for them. So I was like, okay, like you know what is better. You are the travel
Sure. I'll
department.
trust you. I'll trust
I
you.
trust you. Yeah. So that's what I did for a couple of times, and like they wanted to like that department I worked with. They wanted to like transfer me here, but it turned out that they don't have like the budget for that here.
Ah, yeah.
So, and this was like the e-commerce department of this company, and another part of that same organization, which was payments. They somehow, I don't know, they heard about me, and they said, "Hey, we do
We'll
have
take
a
them.
budget though." So yeah, they basically like hijacked me like this. So both
Nice.
my
We were
wife
traded
and
for a
me,
player to be named later, I guess, is the way they
yes.
phrase that. Yeah.
So both me and my wife, we moved here to Seattle on the first day or the second day of January. Like January the second we were
Okay.
flying.
Wow.
And we are here since then, and we are really enjoying it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I have to admit the Pacific Northwest is on the short list of places I would move to if I ever left Minnesota. There's a lot I like about that part of the world. Yeah, it's a if you can handle the rain and the clouds, it's a pretty good climate. And boy, I never get tired of mountains. So when you've got both
Yeah,
mountains and a big body of water, that's a pretty hard thing to pass up, in my opinion. But
yeah. I would say it's not as bad. Like the weather as people like would think, though we have this like one season called the gray,
yeah,
which is like almost half of the year.
right, right,
But yeah, it's
yes,
it's it's pretty good. We are really enjoying it. We really like that there is like so the ocean is close.
hmm,
Hungary doesn't have any like any seas or
sure,
oceans connection, and that there are like mountains. That's really really good.
yeah,
Especially because like I am from a part of Hungary which is called the Big Plain.
okay.
Like you can see through like hundreds of miles like without an issue.
We call that
Everything
North
is like
Dakota.
very very flat.
Yeah, that's North Dakota. Just as far as you can see that way.
Yeah, it's
It's
like that.
that's North Dakota. Totally understand. So how did you end up on getting involved with Spring? What brought you into that ecosystem, and what was that journey like?
So so when I started working for this like software outsourcing company, I believe it was in 2010. Uh, we started using Spring at that time. I believe it was like Spring Framework 2.02. I believe 2.5 was out at that time, but the stack was a little bit older than the latest, and I've been like enjoying using Spring since then, and I used Spring for 10 years at that like
Oh,
working with that company. And after that I moved like to another company here in the US when they did not. They used like Vertex, which is like
okay,
pretty much you write almost everything on your own. You will just
sure,
get like a asynchronous like sort of like a framework that you can like build your endpoints, but you will not get any support for dependency
okay,
injection or like lifecycle management. So inversion of control was completely missing there. And I was like,
sure,
hey, like this is really really hard. And
right,
basically, I tried to bring in Spring there. It had like some ups and downs. some people liked it, some people did not. But like I believe like almost 2 or like I'm 1.5 years working at that company, which I really didn't like this aspect of it. I especially like started like valuing having this like on your tech stack, and
Right.
that's why where I saw like Michael Minalla's tweet on
Oh, sure.
on Twitter that hey, we are looking for like a somebody in the Spring team who knows 1 or 2 things about observability.
Okay.
And I was like, hey, like this was my life in my like in the past like 12 years.
Right.
Because observability was always, we did not you call it observability back in the day, but I was always like really into this aspect of every piece of software so that I know what it is doing under the hood.
Sure.
And that's what observability is really about. And yeah, that's I really like working on these aspects back in the day.
Okay.
And since then, so when I saw it that hey, like okay, I am applying it for this like position, and I did not have a slightest idea that I was 100% sure that hey, after I like send my CV, like they will not like invite me for interview.
Right. Right.
But they did, and that was also like a very interesting experience because
I
the
bet.
Spring team is not doing this like crazy interviewing cycle that hey, like how many golf balls can fit into like a space shuttle,
Right.
or hey, like write me or find I don't know loops in a linked list,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
like all of those crazy stuffs that I believe like most of the companies, or at least in this area,
Yeah.
are doing. So my interview experience was basically like 3 interviews with 5 people, like 2+2+1, and 2 homework assignments, which did not necessarily include coding. You can write code if you want, but if you
Sure.
don't, then you don't need to. And those homework assignments were, I believe, like 1+1 hour, like 2 hours top.
Sure.
And on my first interview, that was with Marcin Zseszak, and
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
with Olga. And Marcin basically like greeted me that, hey, like it's good to finally meet you. And I was like, what? Like, you know who I like it's
That's
good to
awesome.
finally meet you for me, but
Right.
like how do you know me? So
Right.
it turned out that I he's the maintainer or the leader of Spring Cloud Sleuth, and I
Mm-hmm.
used that thing because of like, observability. I loved
Right.
having this UT tracing in my pocket when I need it, and like I basically opened issues. I like interacted with them on like Gitter, and on GitHub as well. And apparently he remembered me. So yeah, that was a weird like
That's awesome.
experience to me, but really pleasant. I did not thought for a fraction of a second that he actually like knows me.
Right, right. Oh, that's fantastic. You know, I think that's an interesting observation. I've had some of my grad students go through some of the, I guess we'd call them the FANG style interviews, and it just sounds, well, it doesn't sound like it's particularly practical in terms of figuring out whether you know anything about how to code. I don't quite understand the fixation with, do bubble sort on a whiteboard. Really?
Yes.
When have you ever done that in a professional seating? I know some people now are starting to use katas as a way of seeing how you think. And so, here's a
Mhm.
simple problem. Well, I shouldn't say simple. Here's a problem. How would you go about starting? What kind of questions do you ask? One of my grad students actually took that and they use that at his company now. Instead of, more a coding interview, they sit down with a kata and they walk through it and they use this as a way of exploring how the person thinks, what kind of questions they ask, et cetera. To me, that's a lot more meaningful than here, let me have you do some random memorization of computer science topics.
Yes,
But
yes. I also always had or struggled understanding why, because to me like
yeah,
these like FANG or lead code style coding interviews are only good for one thing: measuring how good you are at interviewing on like using these problems.
right,
But on
right.
the real job, you will. So if I will see that you are writing a bubble sort or any sorting algorithm on your own in
Stop.
code review, no, like that will you will get a comment that
Full
hey,
stop. Full stop. Yep.
yes, the SDK must include. So there are areas where this is needed. So there are
Sure.
like research. So that I believe there is a place for this style of interviewing, but that's not
Yes.
99% of the companies.
No. No. It wouldn't surprise me if you want to work on the compiler team or the JIT team or something like that. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these questions come up, but for the majority of what amounts to enterprise software development, come on, that's just not reasonable, practical. I honestly think it exists as a weed out, just to simply say, if you're not willing to memorize this and go through all the hoops, then we know you're not serious. And so I guess it prevents well, just on a lark, I'll interview there kind of interviews. But I have to imagine that that's also closing them off from any number of
Yes.
candidates that might be fantastic. And I think that's probably harming them in ways that they're not able to observe.
Or simply maybe they are just not like good at that styling of like solving
Right.
problems. I believe that's like these like words are or can be like very very far apart. When you need to, for example, like write a web application with a nice like I don't know, like REST API using some kind of like a data store, that covers an awful lot of of
Right.
the web
Right.
applications as of today. And I believe like that's a hard problem to tackle. Like writing, for example, a usable I don't know, like a REST API, that's not easy. And
No.
I have seen like very, very, very terrible ones. For example, like over the weekend, I just like used an API uh, it was like a public API, but it had like a paid version as well. And the API I used that was like basically like a part of the paid version. So you would think it's better or should be at least like good or usable. But for example, authentication, the API key, it traveled in the query string in the URL. Why? I
Right.
needed to like do an awful lot of code in order to try to find all of those exceptions and like error messages which like included the URL, because why not? Like the thing that you are using should tell you what you are calling if something failed. But if it tells you, then it also like leaks the secret. So I
Right.
believe this is like a much more valuable skill to be good at. Like, for example, writing
Right.
like web applications, than for example being good at lead code.
Sure. Sure. Well, we've clearly triggered Fuel Snable here. There are a number of
Yeah.
comments around this one. I think you're absolutely right. It sets the wrong expectations. Totally agree with that one.
Yeah.
And so I like where we're going here. So you're super excited about this company because you really love these hard problems. And then you get hired and okay, now go fix this problem. You're like, wait, but that's not the kind of problems I wanted to fix. But I want to do this lead stuff. Yeah, no, you solve it by Googling.
Yeah.
And
He's nailing it. This is the reality as of
right.
today, unfortunately.
Yep. And I think this is what I was driving at, that approach undoubtedly takes qualified candidates out of the equation. People who maybe
Yes.
didn't have a traditional computer science background, they came at this from another career or they came at this from a different major. And so it makes a lot of those folks say, okay, well, not for me. And I frankly think that's a contributing factor to some of our D&I issues in this space. And I just don't get why we would want to close off an avenue of talent, especially knowing how many companies are struggling to find talent. So why would we make it even harder? So yeah, we clearly, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that there's, yeah, exactly. Let's walk you through a real business problem that we have. And more importantly than can they code it correctly on the whiteboard is, are you asking the right questions? Are you thinking about this in a logical way? To me, that's much more, revealing is, all right, how do you approach a problem? What questions do you ask? And where do you start? That to me is great. So I really appreciate those comments. I guess I didn't realize we needed a trigger
Me
warning
too.
on leak
I,
code.
I was ranting about this a lot, and I usually
Yeah.
bump into people like asking me that, okay, but what would you do like instead of that?
Sure.
And yeah, there are a lot of things that you can do like instead of this. And I was like that was the like pre-COVID times where basically like all of these like interview loops were like on site. So basically they invited you so that you can use the whiteboard. I was like, hey, just like, sit next to me and let's write a web application together. I can pair program with you. You will like get the keyboard. Sometimes I can like interact and let's see where we go. And I will get like way more information about like how good will you be as a candidate for this job by doing literally what that job needs, not by doing something else.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I guess Fuel Sample's okay with this. We woke him up. So I guess that's okay. And let's see, Dan's got some thoughts about this. I'm okay with the whiteboard and asking someone to solve a problem, but it should be about what we're working on, create a new REST API, talk me through it. Yeah, absolutely, Dan. I think you're hitting on the right point here. There's nothing wrong inherently with that, as long as you also understand that the whiteboard doesn't have any red squigglies like our editors do. We also don't have Google there. And to be fair, most of this job is knowing where to go to find the answer, not having it all memorized. That's a waste of precious brain, brain capacity to memorize all this stuff. So yeah, I agree. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's this idea that, well, if you can't whiteboard, XYZ algorithm, yeah, okay, you can memorize that, and that doesn't tell you you're a good engineer.
You know Michael Carducci, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as far as I remember, that was his story.
Wait, we just mentioned Michael. Double check you still have your wallet, did he? I don't know how it works. He's a magician.
Yeah, I usually when he's around, I put everything into safe.
Yeah, that's smart. That's smart.
So I believe it was his story. Like he was interviewing for a company, and it was like this type of whiteboard interview. And he was asked to write a merge sort. And what he did is just like wrote on the whiteboard sort parentheses and the thing that he needed to sort it.
Right.
And the interviewer was like, "Hey, but you cannot do that." And he was like, I think I just did.
Right.
I was like, okay, but like another thing, this is like not merge sort. This is like, I don't know what for that language or SDK. So he just wrote merge sort or like queue sort. I don't know which one he needed to do, but yeah, to me that is kind of like I believe it's a really good answer for this.
You cheated. No, I did what I would do in the real world, which is use the built-in sort in my collection of choice. Yeah,
exactly.
Now, I do think Fuel has a good Snable has a good point here, that it's this desire to have an objective evaluation, and I think you're absolutely right about that. That see, they scored X, so they must be good. I see this a lot and I'll use the NFL since the NFL season's coming up here. When the draft happens, there's all this talk about how strong somebody is, how fast they are, all their numbers, and I get that because it's very objective, but that doesn't translate necessarily to their ability to be successful on the field. And what I think this shows me, or I guess reminds me of, reinforces, it's really hard to hire. It's really hard to figure out even if you've got a day with somebody to really figure out, is this a good fit for us or not? And you don't always know who's going to pan out, and you don't always know who's going to fail out. My favorite example of this is Tom friggin' Brady, who was a 6th round draft pick and widely considered one of the best quarterbacks of all time, maybe one of the best football players of all time. You know, at a certain point here, he's going to need to start putting Super Bowl rings on his toes. And he was a 6th round draft pick. Every single team in the NFL passed on him, not once or twice, but in many cases 6 times. And if you've got an organization with as much money and as much resources as an NFL team, you know, they will shake any tree, they'll kick over any rock. They've got objective numbers, they've got film, they can go talk to your 3rd grade teacher. And it's still basically a coin flip when they draft somebody. And then you look at what we have to do, where we don't have millions and millions. We don't have a scouting department that's going to universities and grilling people and talking to their professors and talking to their classmates. We got to figure it out in an hour interview. So I think Fuel Snabel's right that this is this desire to try to turn something that is inherently subjective into something that's objective. And I don't think it's particularly successful, but you know, nobody asked me. So, but yeah, we don't, you're never going to, you know, day in, day out in your professional job, now go write me merge sort. And to your point, if I saw that on a code review, I'd be like, try again.
Yeah. Also, I think it makes a little bit more sense. I'm not 100% sure about the current state of like CS degrees or boot camps out there. But if you are coming from or at least used to come from a conventional like CS university, or you get your CS degree, you might not necessarily know how to write a proper REST API or use a database or whatever, but you know these algorithms. But right. I think and maybe that makes a little bit more sense to do these sort of I would say lightish lead code problems there, just to check okay, can he actually code or she, and or what would the code look like? But I believe it's totally fine not doing the same interview for somebody who has 10 years of experience and somebody who has 0, because they will not do the same thing, and your expectations are also should be different for them, and their salary will be different as well. So why would you do the same interview loop for them?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I do apologize for using an American reference there, Fuel Snabel. I sadly am not, despite my fascination with the Premier League, I still don't understand the transfer market and how that relates. Although I do think it's much more capitalistic in nature as opposed to the way it works in the US, where the worst teams get the best players and those players have no choice of who they go work for, which seems inherently wrong in many ways. But, you know, that's how that system works out. So Fuel also had a comment here about when they scored the product price module. Yeah, it is hard. It's always going to be somewhat subjective. I do think, to your point, Fuel Snabel, it's more in line with what you actually need them to be able to do, the kinds of problems they're going to work on, as opposed to some random thing that actually does not matter in the real world or in your environment, your context. So okay, well, good. I'm glad it's not totally out of left field. But all right, so PWCH. I see. There's no vowels. I don't know how to pronounce that. Pachar. I'm going to say Pachar. Lead code mastery just shows a person has been jobless or is a new grad with lots of times. An experienced engineer is more likely engaged. That's an excellent point. I had a grad student a couple of my grad students went through this process, and they're all full-time working engineers to begin with when they come into my program. So they're not kids right out of college. And one of my students said that he spent 3 months studying to get through that. And I thought, boy, that's crazy for someone who's been working in industry for multiple years, who at that point is almost had his graduate degree in software engineering. And that's not enough to prove mastery. He's got to go spend all this time, digging through something that's again, I don't think particularly useful day in, day out. Uh-oh, Jonathan got muted. We're going to unmute you here. Oh, you muted yourself. I can't unmute you. That's interesting. That's a good thing with StreamYard. I didn't know StreamYard wouldn't let me unmute somebody that muted themselves. Fair enough. Sorry about that.
Sorry. So I heard about people who basically spent even more time than that on preparing for these lead code style interviews, 6+ easily. And also I also think that there is another aspect of this, which is I don't really like, because if you, for example, invest time into it to prepare for interviews, this will basically like won't let you to spend time on those things which like matters more on the job, for example, and have like skills which might be a little bit more useful than writing a merge sort.
Sure. Yeah, and I think good comment here from Fuel Snable again, that it's not necessarily a negative sign, but and I think this is the key part here, is lack of it isn't a disqualifier. And it goes on to say, same thing really with a good GitHub history. It's a positive thing, but we shouldn't put too much weight on someone who doesn't have that, because they may not have had the same opportunities and may have had other things going on. You know, I find it distasteful, this notion that, well, if you're not doing a bunch of side projects, we don't want to hire you. Well, why? Can I do the job or not? And, you know, hopefully you can figure that out from my, you know, my background. But it's hard. Hiring's hard. That's the moral of the story. I think we've all had that interview where we thought, oh, this person's great, and then we hire them and we're like, oh, that was a mistake.
Also, do you know David Heinemeier Hansen? He's the creator of Ruby on Rails, and also I believe he's also yes. So he had a tweet years ago, which I believe got some attention at that time. He basically tweeted that, "Hey, I'm David, and I cannot write a bubble sort algorithm."
Right.
And he basically did like really famous things in the industry, and he's also famous. And
right.
It cannot be like a scale that you measure people with, because it's not a good scale.
Right. Well, and again, I mean, if that's your only criteria, what great candidates have you now? You can't reach. They won't interview. You know, they feel like they can't get over that hurdle. And who are you casting aside? You know, and I don't think it's a good predictor of success. So, all right. So Fuel Snable, we picked an intern, and several of the inexperienced interviewers were skeptical, hired the person at the end, and was fantastic. Yeah. I mean, that's another part of this too. I've seen some people get really fixated on one or two minor things without realizing I can teach you what I need you to know. And the reality in so many of these cases is, you come into my organization and let's just pick on Angular. We're using Angular today. Well, maybe in 2 years we switch to React, or we switch to Vue, or we switch to something completely different. I need you to be able to learn the new thing. So how good are you at picking up the new thing? That to me is far more important than being able to check some box on you're an expert on using blue paint or whatever you want to call it. But anyway. See, this is what I told you in the pre-show, and I said I don't have a set routine, and we just see where it goes. I had never in a million years thought we would dive down this particular rabbit hole, but there you go. This is what we get into.
Also, I have one more thought on this lead code stuff. I believe, and this is maybe not a very fair thing to say, but I guess lead coding style interviews also makes gatekeeping easier.
Yeah.
Or like encourages it. Because like I think that basically like the difference on these interviews between the interviewer and the interviewee is only that the interviewer knows the solution. And I believe it's really hard to like prevent these things to happen if you have like a interviewing setup like this.
Right. Yeah, it almost self-selects for a certain kind of candidate. And I guess if you've got good data to tell you that 97% of those people have all been successful in our organization, maybe that's a useful selector. But my suspicion is it's not nearly as indicative of success as they would like to believe it is. I think it's simply there because it's one of the few objective things you can do. And also, again, serves as a sieve to make people who aren't serious about it bow out and they don't even go near it. But I also think that means there's probably countless fantastic candidates who won't go through that ringer. And so you're missing out on some fantastic people. But hey, you know, I don't work in the HR departments of any of those organizations, and they've never asked my opinion. So good luck to them. they don't seem to have too much trouble finding people who are willing to go through that gauntlet. So so be it. But
There was an
so
interesting story.
yeah, go ahead.
I like read it on Twitter that like basically the guy like explained or like told his like interview experience that like one of the interviewers like asked like deeper questions about a library or a framework, and basically like majority of his answers like the interviewer reacted majority of his answer that, hey, this is not true, it doesn't work like that, that's completely like wrong. And the tweet thread basically like finished like that. Yeah, the interviewer did not know one thing, that I wrote that library or framework. I was like, yeah, that was a really fun interview for me.
I bet it doesn't work that way. Pretty sure it does. Pretty sure it does.
Also, my favorite is when they basically like need, hey, we need like 12 years of Kubernetes experience. Hey, like that doesn't work out like math-wise.
No.
So there was some other guy I saw like replied to one of these emails that, hey, we need somebody who has, I don't know, 6 years of experience of X. And he replied that, hey, I am sorry, I cannot apply for this job because it needs like 6 years of experience. And I wrote that thing and I started it 4 years ago.
Right.
Sorry.
When I wrote this, it was only 4 years ago, so I'm so sorry I can't apply for your job. I remember seeing those kinds of things, and in fairness, some of that comes from HR that don't necessarily have all the requirements understood, and they get fixated on well, for this to hire at this level, we expect someone who has 12 plus years of experience, and they don't realize that that's not possible with some things. I remember when you first started writing native apps for iOS, there were job posts that said must have 10 years development experience on iOS. And it's like, yeah, that's, step one in that time machine. Yeah, there's just no literal way for that to work, but good luck to you. So, hopefully eventually people realize that, but that's also an interesting statement. You go, well, if your organization doesn't have enough checks in there to say, we can't post a job position for 6 years experience with something that was created 4 years ago, maybe that's a good signal that this isn't a good job to apply for.
Yeah,
maybe. So one of the things that we talked about in the pre-show that keeps kind of popping over your shoulder there is the monolith, and
oh yeah,
I also have a little monolith toy thanks to the one and only Glenn who gave us some toys at I know I got mine I think in Seattle. He must have given yours in Seattle as well.
I get one
on my desk
in Atlanta.
Oh, well, there you go. So I must have been later in the series, but I also have my wonderful bless your heart button, also from the one and only Glenn. So I've got my desk accoutrement from our dear friend there. So he often chimes in on these. I haven't seen him yet, so I don't know. Maybe he's, because I haven't been on the air for a few weeks. Maybe I'm off his schedule. I guess I suppose I could Slack him and say, yo, dude, where are you? Why aren't you on the show here? But it's fine. It's fine. I love that because we've both spent more time than we care to admit working on monoliths. And so having my very own monolith on my desk, brings back good memories.
Yeah, that I actually like spotted this in his background. That's how I got it. Like, hey, like, is that really like a small miniaturized monolith? Like,
yep.
In the back, it's like, yeah, and he showed me, and next time we met, he just like set me up with one. So yeah, I have one since that, and I love it.
I'd love to know where he finds these things. I really would. He's the expert at that. I almost want to have a real job again with a cube so I can show off all my cube toys, but that ain't gonna happen. So Fuel Snail writes monolithic apps. It's fine. Nothing wrong with that. And
there is no problem with that whatsoever.
No, a monolithic shader, basically real time. See, this is something that I've spent some time trying to convince people of, that if it's working, you don't need to change it. And modular monoliths in particular are not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. Oliver from the Spring team, he had a talk, I believe like 2 or 3 years ago, about this topic. And also like this year, his like side project called Modulith, it was brought into like a Spring experimental team. in the Spring experimental project. So what it does basically, it will define you like modules in your application, and it will enforce these module boundaries using ArcUnit.
Sure.
So that if you want to write like modulitic applications, because why not? That is a place for them, of course. You can use that and define your application that way, which will help some.
Nice. Well, Fuel Snable says it was ray tracing of a monolith on a moon. So there we go. We're all the way down to a space odyssey. So one of the things you and I were talking about before was observability. I know that's near and dear to your heart. And we also had a debate about, is it pronounced micrometer or micrometer?
I'm not sure I should be the expert on this.
I don't know. I don't know either. I mean, I've always called it micrometer, but then you were calling it micrometer. And I figured, well, I'm just an architect. I just draw boxes and lines. You're a lot closer to this than I am. So you're probably right.
I hear both. And I'm pretty sure I should not be the one who does like, hey, which one? Yes. It's like, so it was named after the measuring instrument. So it is like a caliper. It has like a small like a ratchet and a clutch in it, and its jaws are basically like very 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 precise. So you can basically like measure things on the micrometer scale, which is like a thousandths of a meter. So it's a pretty small, I would say. And I believe it was named by Spencer. Spencer gave.
Okay. Well, let's ask Spencer. Where is Spencer? I haven't seen him in like a month.
If you want to ask the pronunciation, you can always ask Spencer. Or like originally this was originally started or written by John Schneider.
Okay.
He was also working in a Spring team, so he can also like give you like more insights about like how to pronounce it.
All right. Well, I'll follow up with Spencer, and then we'll report back. So what pulled you into the observability space, and what is it that you like about working on that side of software?
So basically, two things. One was, I believe it was, and I think still, observability is oftentimes neglected.
Yes.
So usually what happens at big companies as well, that they have like this like bucket where they put observability and oftentimes security as well into this bucket, throw it into like a dark corner where it's nothing else, just like spiders and spider webs, maybe in the janitor closet, I don't know, into very, very, very dark places when it's out of sight, and forget about it. Yeah. And that always bothered me. So like one of my thing is observability, but the other one is actually because of the same thought is security. And so that is one. And I always hated going to production without knowing what my application is doing. Because that thing is for sure that the application is not perfect. Right. Because you're humans, maybe the application is perfect because it's like just an eco service. So there is one line of code, which is not very hard to write, but it has a lot of dependencies. It is running on an operating system, which also had like a lot of like moving parts, and it is very complicated. Networking as well. If you go to like fallacies of distributed computing, I love that Wikipedia page. Software is really, really complex, and I don't want to go to prod. If something breaks, I want to know like almost immediately what is broken, why it is broken, and what is the context, what is the blast radius. So that's how I basically spent a lot of times working on observability. And I was lucky that basically the company I worked for, the companies I worked for, they let me do this. So when I asked these questions, that but what happens if this goes down? Like what will happen with the application? And they were not able to answer it. So let's build into things that will answer these questions, or like let's build into things like let's go like way far further and do crazy things, which are like not crazy at all, but it oftentimes seems crazy things like, hey, let's try to answer arbitrary questions. You just deploy your application into production, and from that single moment, you should be able to answer any questions whatsoever. What basically pops up in connection with that application, and I believe that's what observability should be about.
Yeah, well, Yagram B's got a great point, which is, I guess no one sees a problem with neglecting observability, and then Phil Schnabel goes on to say, well, we don't get any complaints from our customers, everything's good. and I think it's observability, in a lot of ways, like Scray kind of falls in that bucket of, well, I don't need it right now. And by the time you realize how important it is, it's like too late. It's sort of the notion of, I know I should really have a fire extinguisher in my kitchen, but I don't have time to do that. Oh, I keep forgetting about it. And then when you actually do have a kitchen fire, I really wish I had that. Same thing with observability. Like the time you really need it is when it's almost too late. And you're like, oops, we should have done that earlier. Is there any way that you found success in trying to convince people this is important and you do need to spend some resources on it? You can't just wait until, oops, we have a problem?
It's a really mixed bag, because I found like people who were like all for this. Like when I showed them that, hey, did you know that your application is down right now in production? And if you did not, and you did not, I know that you did not. Then why? Like why? So sometimes people get like excited about this, and okay, like let's do this, let's fix it. Sometimes they got excited without this, and sometimes they just really don't care. And the scale is like a really like wide here.
Sure.
Actually, like I have, when I tried to basically convince people, I usually like try to attach like a story like behind it. I experienced in production. For example, I started, so this was like, I don't know, 2 companies ago, I started writing a small thing which basically puts a bunch of like runtime information about your API on web endpoint. For example, what Java version are you using? What is the, I don't know, the Git commit and the branch that this application was built on top? What is the local time of the app? A lot of things like that. And when I was questions, I did say, okay, let's go through this, and I can tell you a story. Every single one of these that caused a production issue and can be like prevented, or it could be like significantly easier to troubleshoot. For example, the Java version. I usually ask this question from people that, hey, like, do you really know like which version of Java are you running on right now?
Right.
I say, yeah, we are running on Java 8. Okay, but which update? Because did you know that there were like breaking changes between them?
Are you
sure
really you don't have that vulnerability?
Yes. So that's one thing. And also, like, are you sure that you are actually on Java 8, not on something else? Because if somebody just fat fingered the config file, or you basically upgraded to a Java version, but your deployment solution, like an hour later, decided that, hey, this is not healthy, so I am rolling back that upgrade. That's actually like all of these things happened to me. I saw like we had a application. This was like Java 6 times. It wasn't today. But the application used a homegrown container for the web service. So it wasn't Tomcat. It was something they built. And this homegrown container had a memory leak, but only on Java 5. On 6, it was fine. So basically, what happened, I upgraded the Java version for 6 updates, something to the next one. And I deployed it. And we had a memory leak. So we started like looking into like, okay, like there were like a bunch of other things with this deployment. The previous deployment is completely fine. The next one or the current one, it has a leak. So we started looking into it. And I believe like me and maybe 1 or 2 like very senior engineers were looking into this for a week. And there was like, we had load tests at that time. So first things when this like popped up, we just like fired up a load test for this, and that load test was chewing that application for a whole week, 7 days. There was no memory leak whatsoever, only in production. And on the next Monday, I figured out that the application was running on Java 5 in production, because all of these like Java versions or the JREs that the application was running, it was checked into Perforce, which is like a it was Git or SVN in the old times.
Right.
So
Trigger
they
warning.
were checked into, yes, they were checked into Perforce, and somebody checked into, from the ops team, they managed these Java versions for us. Somebody from the ops team, they checked in a Java 5 version under the folder name Java 6 update, whatever. Yes. So basically how I realized that we are running on Java 5 was like typing Java minus version in production in the folder when the application was running.
Wow.
Accidentally. Yeah. So that happened. Another thing when basically like the same thing, we were not on the right Java version, was like at that time the deployment process was like semi-automated, so there were like manual steps, and we were not able to do those steps, but ops people did, and one of those steps was setting the Java home variable. Don't ask me why. It was like, why not a script did set it? I believe it needed to be set for the whole like box. I don't know. And they fat fingered it. So we were on a different Java version. It did not cause any issues because that was just like a different update. But yeah, sometimes Java updates can contain breaking changes or breaking. Sort of. For example, once I learned that they basically like removed like SSL v2 support in Java 8 in an update release, and we just updated the patch version of Java 8, and the application was broken because like Oracle removed things, which is, I guess, fine. But yeah, it's crucial to know like all of these things that you might not expect at all to happen to your application until it will, because eventually for sure it will. And when you will be there and the kitchen is on fire, you know how to put it out, and you know what you need to know what caused it. So yeah,
be prepared. Be prepared.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, Fuel Snable made a point earlier about that, adding observability as an afterthought, it won't be as good as if you did it continuously.
Exactly.
Completely agree there.
Yes, totally true.
And then he had some interesting thoughts here around logs. And so it tries to promote debug locally using logs as opposed to debugger as a way of improving log messages. I think we've all seen some pretty horrible log messages. My sort of default on this seems to be the logs either have nothing because you didn't log anything, or everything is logged like 10 or 12 times because it's all catch, log, throw, catch, log, throw, catch, log, throw. Yeah, exactly. So it's either the, I've got too many logs or there's not enough logs, and I think that's an interesting, way of looking at it. I'd never thought of using logs as a debugger. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but interesting.
System out print line, the always available debugger.
Right.
I believe like logs are like it's totally part of observability. I totally agree on that, and I believe logs are usually a lot of times are like underappreciated, and and this is kind of a interesting take, and maybe people will throw tomatoes at me for saying this, but I believe you can implement like a pretty high or good level of observability using only logs. And I am saying this because I unfortunately did this. I worked at a company and they did not let me having a metrics backend, and they did not let me to have a distributed tracing backend. So these are basically like services that you need to deploy into your infrastructure. They did not let me to do this. So basically all of my metrics and distributed tracing information, they went into logs. And I basically queried them in with our log ingestion solution. I'm not. I would not say that this is something that you should do. Please
Sure.
don't. Use the tools that are for the jobs, namely like a real like metrics or distributed tracing backend. But yeah, those can basically take you further than you
Sure.
would like original thing.
Well, Fuse Naval goes on to say that logs are what we have in prod, and so if you do that in dev, you're probably going to have better messages to help you when you inevitably have a prod issue.
Yes.
That's a really
Yeah.
interesting way of
Dog
looking at
fooding.
that.
Yes, that's
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it doesn't mean
totally.
it should be your only thing if you've got other options, but and then it also goes on to say I've had some locale related bugs. Is it the U.S. or Scandinavia? I've had some interesting time related bugs. Same kind of thing.
Oh
We make a lot of
yes.
assumptions about where our software is going to run, but this is the one that I thought was really interesting. They had an incident with an EC2 instance silently upgrading the JVM. Ooh, ouch. Immutable infrastructure, repeatable infrastructure. This is one of those, well, we just were trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
Please don't be helpful.
Yeah. And these things are like totally that are like you will not think about this in the first
No.
place and can get you like really serious trouble in production. Well, actually, I have another like interesting story which is kind of connected to this like observability domain, and it is usually you will not think about this. I usually ask people if I see that they are like deploying to production that hey, like, do you know like how many services do you have and where are they running, and if you know these, like on which version, and are you 100% sure if they are on that version that you think they are? Because I usually like to if I go to production with something, I usually like to have some kind of like a service registry, maybe
Oh
service
yeah.
discovery as well, but at least at the minimum like a service registry, so I know like which versions, where they are, and how many
Totally.
of them are running. And I worked at a company where I basically like implemented this, and I had like a Eureka and a Spring Boot admin dashboard, and there was a screen next to my desk, and I put these things onto that. So when I basically just walked into the office, I saw all of the services, like which was up and down, what was their status, version numbers, and so on.
Sure.
And like these were like at least like 3 of these services that was transferred to another team. And apparently they did not like that when Eureka started locally, it started with like a warning message with an exception. There was a stack trace that, hey, I'm not able to like connect to something, but that was not a big thing. And also you can basically just suppress that exception easily so that you will only get it when something is really broken. And they removed this thing. And a year later, like fast forward, like obviously when they removed it, all of those components were basically like disappeared from my Eureka dashboard
Sure.
next to my desk. But fast forward a year, they reappeared. I was like,
Oh,
okay, like that's interesting. So I
interesting.
went to the guy and I was like, hey, like now you like it, so you put it back, or what happened? And they said, no, we did not put it back. I said, okay, but it is there. It's running. You know that, right? I said, no, it is not.
No, it's
I said,
not.
it's there. I know.
Yeah, it really is.
I
It
can
really is.
connect to that. Something is running there which says that it's your service, but the version number is at least a year old here.
Oh
So
no.
somehow, I don't know how, something like a process started a version of their service which was like 1.5 years old, and they did not know it. They had
Wow.
no idea whatsoever what is happening. So I usually like these stories like as examples, like why do you need
Right.
observability?
Right.
Because you will bump into these issues eventually.
Right. Yeah, so Fuel agrees with me in terms of time. Time is always fun. And integrating into a service that runs in Norwegian time, not a problem. Well, winter and summertime, daylight saving time, all of a sudden there's ambiguous timestamps as well as forbidden timestamps. Yeah, I'm considering shutting down the integration. I know I've told this story a few times. I don't know if I've told it on this show or not, but years and years ago, I worked on this system that we built for some other part of our organization. And then after we built it, we handed it over to them. And a couple months later, my director comes over. He's like, hey, you worked on that thing for the codes folks. I'm like, yeah. Well, they had a build break this morning. Do you think you could help them? I'm like, well, yeah, sure. But they should just look at the last commit. And, that's probably going to tell them what broke the build. And they're like, yeah, they haven't actually changed the code in a couple of days. So they're not sure why the build broke. All right. So I went and looked at the build, and sure enough, one of the tests had failed. I'm like, well, that's weird. So then I dug into the test and realized, oh, this test is going to fail every 7 years. And I don't, for the life of me, remember how I fixed it. I wrote the dang thing, so it was my fault. But you don't sort of think, well, let's see, are there any weird time things that happen on a cycle? And no. So I'm pretty confident the way I fixed it was by putting a note in there saying, yes, this is going to fail every 7 years. Sorry. But maybe I came up with a better way of testing it. But yeah, time, the bane of a programmer's existence. Am I right?
Yeah. Well, once I was it was kind of like a data synchronization bot that was transferred to the team I was working in. And when it was transferred, there was like a couple of red flags. For example, there were no tests. And also, when I checked the application in production, that was actually like a lot of times down, like even more times than it was up. It was a bot, so it wasn't like responding like real like messages, but it synced the data. So data got like out of sync, but if you like restarted, it was like resync. So it was, I believe people before that was okay with that. But there was like another feature of this application. It went down twice per year, the same time every year. Can you guess why?
Because of the conversions, daylight saving?
Daylight saving, yes, daylight
Perfect.
saving, exactly.
Perfect.
So what it did, it basically checked like, hey, what was the last time I synced this data? And it was like, hey, like that was like an hour in the future. Crash.
Oh no.
Yes.
Wow.
And yeah,
wow. That's good times.
Happened.
That is good times. Yeah, time. It's fantastic. Fuel also had one other question I wanted to throw at you here, and I think we've kind of hinted around it, but I'm curious, do you have sort of a stock definition you like to use of observability when people ask? I mean, we've touched on a lot of it, right? Around logs and knowing what's going on in your system. Is there anything that you like to use when you're describing this to folks?
So, for example, if you go to Wikipedia, it will give you some sort of a good like definition, because observability originally is from math. It's from control theory. Basically, I believe the term was coined by a Hungarian mathematician. And I usually like to define this, or like basically shorten that definition in a form of how well you can understand your system or the internals of your system based on the outputs that it provides. And I believe this is kind of like I really like this because it's not like it's a little bit vague about what can be an output, because the output can be basically everything. Some people are saying that, hey, observability is logging metrics, distributed tracing. The three pillars of observability, which I don't really like, because sure, it will give you like data about what is happening inside, so they are part of observability, but they are not the silver bullet. They are not the only solution. There are other solutions that you can do, and there are other things other than these three that you can basically add to your system out of these, and it will contribute a lot for your observability or the level of observability of your system. For example, like having an endpoint, for example, the Spring Boot actuator info endpoint, where you can, or the health endpoint. To me, those are also parts of observability. Putting, for example, the Java version there, or like other things that you think are important, can save your life or save the day when there is a production issue. Or they can tell you that, say, something is wrong, like before it will be a real issue.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, you and I were talking about that, about adding some things onto info as a way of doing that. And we've had a Findle sighting. So see, now my day's complete because I've got both Fuel Snable and Thindle hanging out. So that makes me happy. I always like it when we get the heckling. So there you go. Is this where? Yes. And where have you been hiding, Thindle? Although in fairness, we did reschedule slightly here today because of timing issues. But that's how this game works sometimes. But anyway. Well, I just glanced up and noticed that we've been talking for a while. I've stolen like 2+ hours of your time already, and I know I could continue doing this for another hour, but I'm sure you have much more valuable things to do than just hang out on Twitch with me. But I very much
I
appreciate
really
it, my
enjoyed
friend.
it.
Oh, that's
Thank you.
fantastic. And I'm looking forward to, I think hopefully I get to see you again here before the year is out. I assume we're going to both be in San Francisco at Spring One.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that in December. There's a lot worse places to be than San Francisco in December for sure. And I am actually going to be on the air again next week. My man Rustam's going to be hanging out. So he and I got to be in the same space at the conference affectionately known as J Bacon, JBCN. So I ran into him there. He came in and heckled one of my sessions. So I was delighted that I could convince him to come hang out with me. So we will be back, and hopefully we'll do a few more of these here before October. So I got a few other folks lined up. But if you've got other guest ideas, I'm always all ears, friends. So anyway, well, again, thank you so much, my friend. I really appreciate it. This pleasure as always. Looking forward to hanging out with you someplace in the near future, and we'll see what kind of trouble it gets us into.
I believe I hope I will be on Spring One, and it seems I will go to Java One this year.
Fantastic!
Because Java One should be back in October.
I am so glad they resurrected that. I tip of the hat to Jonatan team for bringing that back, because that was long one of my favorite events. So I'm glad to see it's been rechristened. I know it was Code One for a while there, but it's not the same. There's something special about Java One, in my opinion. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, my friend. I'm gonna play our outgo, and then we'll see what kind of trouble it gets us into.